What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jan Kestle, and she is the founder of Environics Analytics. And so, Jan, before I formally introduce you, I like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And Jan, I'm not going to age you, but you've been doing this for decades. You have a lot of experience in the field. I had Kevin Hurrigan on. He's had an agency since 1995 and talked about the evolution of the landscape of business, of the agency space, and of everything in between. So that was really interesting interview. I also had Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey has the Second Bite podcast, and he pairs private equity with agencies and actually helps sell agencies. And it's interesting because he talks about valuations in the landscape as well from the standpoint of selling, and he finds sometimes people make more on the second bite than they do on the first because the private equity sells again. So that was an interesting conversation, and many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. Jan, we call ourselves the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they can create great content and have amazing conversations and develop great relationships. For me, the number one thing is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Jan Kestle. She is the founder and president of Environics Analytics, and they provide insights on Canadian markets and population. And for over 5 decades, they've helped hundreds of organizations solve business problems with statistics and math. She started just her and has grown it to 300 staff. And what they do is they identify the problems that need solving. They design best practice analytics, and then they ensure that the results can actually be put into action so it can change outcomes for the organization. So Jan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to talk about the journey. One little correction, Environics Analytics has been around for 20 years, but I'm the one who's been working for decades. And yeah, that's kind of aged me to say how many. But interestingly enough, I've always been passionate about using statistics and data and mathematics to think about problems. It's just kind of the way my mind works. So the first career I had was in government, and I worked as a government statistician for the province of Ontario, which is, provincial or like a state organization. Statistics is generally a national responsibility. So what we do and the local level is usually smaller, but I had a really good opportunity to come out of school with a degree in math and go right into a statistical organization in the early days when we didn't even have personal computers on our desks. And the thing about that was, I think, by working as a traditional statistician, looking at surveys and looking at compiling data, I really got a chance to look at how data make a difference to all kinds of activities. And so I did that for a number of years and actually ended up leading that organization. And it taught me how to really bring together the needs that organizations have for information and look at the sources and often think about how to use disparate sources and kind of adding value. Because fast forwarding to now, everybody's into data, but the truth is there's so much data that what's not so important is how much data you have, but it's what you actually do with it. So I had 20 years of grounding in working for a provincial government. Meant that I worked on things like employment equity targets, locations for government offices, looking at social services, looking at economic accounts. So I got to really understand a lot of ways in which information can impact society. I left that organization after 20 years because the main well, the only way I could really get new challenges was to get out of the data field. And so I didn't want to do that. And I had the opportunity to go and work for a really cool little company that was the first company in Canada to take census data from the government and transform it so it could be used by businesses. It had been founded by an entrepreneur. When I joined, there were about 50 people. I'd never been a salesperson in my life. And I was recruited there because they wanted someone to sell the kinds of work they did back to government. And so I did that, and I progressed again to be the president of that organization as it grew from, about 50 people to being a very large enterprise in Canada, and also some expansion into the US. That company was called CompuSearch. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was eventually owned by the Polk company that's in the automotive statistics, and by Equifax and others. And I mention that because in my career, I've seen the evolution of what kind of data are available and how people use data. We've been through where all we could really get was government data and survey data, and then organizations had their own data in the CRM time, and you could mine data about individuals, and then we got into digital data. And what I've seen is that the more data that become available, the more people can really bring insights. And I stayed with that company for another 12 years. And I guess from a slightly cynical point of view, I say I saw it reorganized and sold, 3 or 4 times, and helped with that and was happy to do that. But a lot of people were making money off the businesses that we had built. So then I finally decided to do something on my own. So kind of went from government to working for another entity, and then really starting my own business in the last 20 years of my life. And we started Environics Analytics in 2003. Our angel investor was one of the most respected pollsters in Canada, a leading sociologist, a very well-known author by the name of Michael Adams, who ran a research company, but also specialized in helping understand the values and attitudes, like the belief systems. So getting away from just behavior and demographics. And Michael is known for writing a great book about Canadians called Sex in the Snow. And then he later wrote a book called Fire and Ice, which won the Best Public Policy Book Award in Canada in, I think, about 2005, which showed the differences in values and attitudes between Canadians and Americans. So when he came forth to partner with me to start Environics Analytics, he said, well, you could use the name of my company or not. And I said, I think we'd be happy to, because it was a well-known Canadian brand. And we founded Environics Analytics to be kind of a companion to the market research business. And the foundation of that business was not to collect data and do surveys, but to use data that existed and to build granular data based on the principle of geodemography, which is basically to get as much information as we could for very small areas. And in our case, we were talking neighborhoods, and leverage the principle that if you know where people live, you're likely to know a lot about them. And of course, there is the fallacy that might not always be true, but it's generally pretty true. So we started kind of what's known as the postal code business, or in the US, there was ZIP+4 businesses. And we said, we can, even if we don't have individual data, we can attribute behavior from models that we get from census, and then we can look at population growth, and we can look at cities' densities, and we can look at proximity to shopping patterns and so on. So we can create really granular, up-to-date demographics. And then from those demographics, we can create segments that are multidimensional, that capture different types of neighborhoods. And if all those information are available at the postal code, then we can loop in important surveys, both from governments and from other organizations. So if I know what kind of segment you fit into, and I know from a large, reliable national survey, the segment behavior in terms of shopping behavior, media behavior, lifestyle activities, values, and attitudes, then I can use statistical processes to make an inference to get kind of a 360-degree view of customers and populations. So that was the foundation of the business, is demographic segmentation, personification. But when you're producing data like that, right down to the 6-digit postal code, which in Canada is one side of a street between two intersections, then those data, as well as helping you understand the behavior in areas, can be combined with the rich data that organizations, both public and private sector organizations, have about the people that they participate with. So if I overlay all this rich behavior data with what I know about my own customers, or if I'm a charity, I combine it with what I know about donors, or I'm a not-for-profit, I know who's using my community centers, then I can start to understand that I have multiple kinds of users. And going back to first principles of marketing, what's the right product offer? What's the right message? What's the right place to get it across? And what's the right price? So I can go back, literally think about the 4 Ps of marketing. And now I can execute that right down to the local level. And I could have local level marketing strategies that nest all the way up to a national. So it's a very exciting concept that leverages geography, demographics, and statistical methodology. It's a bit long-winded, but that's kind of the foundation of what we wanted to do then, was build the databases that could drive that kind of analytics. But we also knew that most of our customers wouldn't have the data scientists and the data power necessarily to implement it. Like the big banks would, and some of the telecoms and really large retailers would have analysts, and they could do great work. But what we did was we embedded our data into purpose-built software, so that instead of just accessing data, users could get answers. So trying to solve a business problem, we've, over the years, added to the building of our 30,000 proprietary data variables for every one of the 700,000 postal codes of Canada. We've added a software as a services platform that literally has thousands of workflows. So if I'm running a program for a charity, or I'm an analyst for a retailer, I can actually go into the software in Vision, and I can say, okay, I want to upload my customers who spend more than X dollars on kids' clothes, and I want to see what segments they fit into, and what their where their locations are, how close they are to the malls, and how, really, if I want to get a message to them, what's the right message? And it's sort of the combination of data and software, plus the third leg of the stool are consultants who really understand their industry. So we organize our services by the industry sectors. And so we build data and software routines that answer, the day-to-day questions that a lot of analysts have, and really puts the expertise that we have at their fingertips. And then we help them interpret the results. And what's become more important as the business has evolved is not only producing good analytics, but making sure that they can be put into action. And so we have a lot of partnerships. We have partnerships with the DSPs. We have partnerships with Canada Post. We have partners with organizations that sell media. So, and with advertising agencies, so that the insights can actually be put into action. And then, of course, the Holy Grail is, after we do that, can we measure the results and show which things work? And so it becomes a test and learn environment to make sure that data are really helping an organization become more effective, whether it means being more profitable or offering better social services. One way or another, with all this emphasis on data, we want to make sure that the data and insights that are being developed can cause an organization to take a different course of action and actually make them more successful.
I'm curious, Jan, thanks for that. There's so much to unpack there. I'm curious, early on, you start, and you can help many different companies, many different industries, many niches. In the beginning, it's you, right? And eventually you hire a small team. who do you focus on early on? Who do you are thinking your ideal client is and niches at that point?
Yeah, well, it's a bit tough because first of all, when you start, you can't just hang out a shingle. You have to acquire all the data, and you have to model and build the value added, because we're not a reseller of data. All the data that we produce has had proprietary methodologies to drive it down to the ground and then link databases that would otherwise not be glued together. So that was task number one.
How long did it take to get everything together before you could actually go out and get your first?
It took us about a little bit more than a year.
Yeah.
We were founded in August of 2003, and we launched our first major product release in 2004 in September.
Was that scary at all?
I was super excited because, I had worked with data and in the industry, and I knew that a lot of businesses were looking for a more integrated solution. Like, it was the time when everybody knew that it was important to use data, and people had more their hands on data because they had more CRM systems and point of sale data, but they wanted to combine their own data with data that would enhance it. So if you have data about your customer, you generally know what they bought with you, but you don't know, a lot of their demographics. You don't know what their mindset is. So blending the data together was a big part of that first year of prep. But once we had, I would say, the critical mass, then we knew a lot of people in the industry, and we knew that in financial services and in retail, they were always looking for kind of advanced solutions. So I think our first customer was a bank. I think our second customer was a large telecom. The focus was really on businesses as well as government departments that were trying to understand the small differences in their customer base. So it doesn't have to be just one industry, but it's about 80% of our business is consumer focused. About 20% could be considered B2B or B2B2C. But the best customer is someone who's really trying to use segmentation and personification to get the right message to the right people using the right medium at the right time. And there's a lot of granularity in that. So we grew in retail and finance and telecom and not-for-profit. But we also got a lot of business from governments, because there were government departments who were starting to think about their constituents as sort of, individuals instead of, just everyone, trying to understand if I'm looking at sending messages out about health or about safety, everybody's not the same. And so the whole purpose of these kinds of data is to really understand the differentiation and get closer to people so that you can really connect with them and engage with them. And so I think those were the earliest customers. But more recently, I would say in the last 10 years, we've branched a lot more into the relationship between the food manufacturers, consumer packaged goods, and the grocery stores. Because if you don't get your shelf planning right, if you go into a grocery store that's not in your neighborhood, you might notice that where I'm used to getting my 6-ounce peanut butter jar is not in the same place, because shelf planning is neighborhood specific. And so, helping the retailers and the manufacturers understand neighborhood demographics, untapped potential, that was an area that we really focused on in the sort of the second decade. Then we moved into things like energy, where I remember our customer at Ontario Hydro said, "Oh, we're so happy to work with you guys because, we used to think of our customers as meters. Now we're interested in promoting to people energy efficiency programs, the sort of the remote ways of controlling your thermostat when you're out of town." And of course, that's evolved now into working with the car companies to understand the demand for e-vehicles. And then when you do that, you're going to project the potential for e-vehicles into areas. And then you also have to figure out who's going to use the grid. And then is that grid going to be used for home charging, or are you going to be using the electric vehicles for intercity? And so does the grid, can the grid sustain it? So you look at the consumer demand, what the manufacturers and the retailers are going to produce. And then that brought us into the energy sector, which is a very exciting sector because it's got a lot of location and transportation analysis. So the final big evolution for us was to take the insights that we create for all these different marketers and really help people figure out how to put them into action. And so I think for the first 15 years, we were really not selling and collaborating that much with media and agencies. I think we probably mistakenly, I kind of thought, well, that we're going to kind of hoard the data. Not that it was intentional, but this data is really valuable. We're going to keep it and people are going to buy it directly from us. But what I learned over the last 5 years, and it's you read about it in the literature, is that the more the data can be out there and used by people for multiple purposes, then the more value it brings back. So what we did was we started to partner with agencies where their customers were our customers. And there still is a divide between insights and activation amongst the brands. So you have teams of people working on market research and working on insights and branding and positioning. But then the guy down the hall or the woman down the hall who's planning the media spend, and that they're somewhat removed. And then you have the agency. And then when we had the digital agencies, you had a lot of disconnect. So the thing that's changed for us in the last 5 years is we've really become the lingua franca. We've put our data, our wealth data, and our Prism segmentation system out there so that the agencies can use it with the customers that we share. We've put it onto the media platform so you can actually define a segment, a custom segment using our data. You can buy it through a DSP, or you can buy TV. We partner with Bell Media, where you can actually buy TV based on our segments from within their buying system. Not just with Bell Media, but also with Rogers and Chorus in Canada and CBC and others. So our idea has been to be the glue. So we provide the insights to the brands, and then we've made the data available to the ecosystem so that you can actually activate directly. Because unfortunately, in the past, we could produce these great insights reports. And then what would happen is someone in an agency would read them and turn them into a pure demographic. But we want to be able to reach and engage with customers and consumers around a broader thing than just demographics. So it's been very exciting to expand into some of those, what we call the execution or the activation side. And the next frontier, which we started on, but there's still a long way to go, is so after you do that, can you really measure statistically what worked and what didn't? If I drove by this board and I saw this ad, and then I walked into a store and I bought something, can we actually get a better measurement on the return on advertising spend? And the truth is that the data and the technology that are becoming available are making that possible. The challenge is there's the technology and the providers aren't always as rigorous. I'm a hawk on methodology. I say, don't let technology trump methodology. You're trying to use data to simulate reality to decide how you need to spend your money. And so let's make sure that the data and analytics that are so prolific are being done with best practices so that the user gets a good outcome. People are going to pick a location, or they're going to drive an omni-channel media campaign. They're going to spend millions of dollars. And so we have to make sure that we're doing the very best job of, showing them who their right audiences are, which medium works well, what the kind of omni-screen reach is, how that can be optimized in your MMM so that you're you're really spending your money in a way that comes back. And what's exciting is you have the capacity to do a good job, and it's limited because of a lot of technological constraints, but we have a growing capacity to actually measure the outcome. And so that makes me really optimistic that we're just going to keep finding new frontiers.
There's so much, Jen, that can be done with data. It's incredible. I want to talk about the team and the evolution of the team, because I'm sure when you came out and you were studying math and physics, I'm not sure at that point you're saying, I'm going to have a 300-person company, right? So it started off as just you. Talk about how the team evolved from you and where to go.
So because I had worked in a previous kind of information company, I knew that the key components were someone who can really understand the data and how to model it and make it as accurate and link disparate data sources together. It's a big challenge because you can go to 10 different suppliers and you can get a view of, Canada and the provinces and the large cities, but to go right down into a neighborhood and bring all different kinds of data, I needed a methodologist who really understood how to do that. And one of the founders who has passed away, but was an amazing pioneer in data science, is Dr. Tony Lee. And he was, a part of that founding team. He also had a younger methodologist that he was mentoring, Danny Human, who I started working together with in previous company, and he's a founder, and he's like a 30-year veteran on this data blending and how to create products. So really good quality on the data side, number one. Second key component, because as I mentioned before, I don't think you can make a living just selling data. You have to put the data into a solution that makes it easy for people. So the second was to bring an individual who I had worked with previously as well, but who was innovative in thinking about, we're already in the internet era, but we're in 2003, we're really thinking about software as a service. And we knew that if we licensed a commercial off-the-shelf software, wouldn't be able to do some of the things that our methodologists wanted to do. So we did a lot of mapping, but if you just put the data into a desktop mapping package, you couldn't do some of the statistical algorithms that you needed. So I needed to bring a second component, which was a person who could conceptualize and actually code the software to deliver the data to the customers. And then the other two key people were people who knew industries, and we knew we were going to focus on the financial sector and the retail sector. So there were 8 founders. There was a IT person, and then the data methodologist had a person who was an actual data scientist who could, augment the team. But we just rolled up our sleeves and started to build the products and think about the delivery of those products and think about the use cases. And for me, I was just so fortunate to have a great partner in terms of my investor, but also to entice those people who were known as leaders in the industry and people who were wanting to do it differently. Like we had kind of reached the maximum of what we could do in our previous engagements. And we said, we want to build that analytics space for the future where it's self-serve, where it's configurable, and where it goes beyond just basic demographics and segmentation. Because our partner, Environics Research, was the leading provider of information about psychographics, was the first time we built segmentation system that combined psychographic research with demographic behavior. And so the methodologists had to think about how to do that. And so I guess we wanted to take the kind of work we've been doing to the next level. And I can honestly say that I was able to assemble the A team. And I think, first of all, I shared some of my equity with them. So I was in a partnership with the funder, and that was a really great experience too, because we had a unanimous shareholders agreement and we had the two groups and we got to decide. And then within my group, I shared equity with the people who left other jobs and came and joined me. And
That's what I was going to say. Like, you assembling a dream team, it's how do you attract that top talent?
Yeah. And some people have said to me, oh my God, you're so generous. You gave up too much equity. And I don't agree with that at all. I believe that whole team, the teams are what makes companies successful, and learning how to work as a team. And as we moved on from there and we hired people, I think we were competitive in the marketplace. We also do a lot of work. We still do a lot of work with universities and with associations in order to be a part of the thought leadership and help people to gain satisfaction, not just from their pay, but by being a part of a statistical organization that's innovative. So I think by being innovative and motivating people to understand that data can make a difference to people's lives, to the well-being of our community, we attracted people who believe in that. And so we have a very low turnover rate. We have employees with long tenure. We have many employees in our company who've worked in this same field for decades because they're very passionate about using data to make people's lives better. And I believe that in the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do.
Jen, talk about, so I could see how you assembled this dream team, and you have software engineers, you have people in specific industries, you have data scientists. Talk about, people could have the best service or product in the world, but we still have to sell it. Mm-hmm. So talk about the sales piece for a second. And I don't know if it's these people were so ingrained in a certain industry that they had connections. How did you then get this and sell this into the world?
So the sales leaders, we had one original, and she and I, went out and built a business one customer at a time. But the success we had, that was Catherine and I in the beginning, I think was that we really understood. We weren't the super geeks, like we weren't the modelers and the programmers, but we understood how these data were different from what people were used to buying. If they were used to buying survey data or just working in their own CRM, that the sales team knew the secret sauce of the kind of methodology and understood the industries that we were selling to. But at the end of the day, I believe that salespeople are born, and you have to be willing to ask for the business. So, one of my mentors, Bruce Carroll, who was one of the founders of the geodemographics business in the United States, he said to me, "Remember, nothing happens till somebody writes a check." And so I think the success of our sales team, and what we did was we built the business for the first couple of years, and then when we knew we were really on a roll, then we hired a person who was focused on retail, who had experience in retail. Then we hired someone who had been in the consumer packaged goods space, and then we hired someone from the government. So we kind of built it up that way. But the truth is that salespeople have to be completely enthusiastic and passionate and knowledgeable about their product, but they also have to know that it is going to make a difference. And you have to, it's a missionary sell. You have to be convincing people that they need this and that it's going to help them. And then you also have to make sure that you do have back at the office the servicing and support, because when you're selling complex products, you don't want the bait and switch where the salesperson gets somebody in the door and then the customer service team and the customer success team doesn't, actually make it real for the customer. So salespeople have to sell, service people have to service, and you have to know the problem that the customer's trying to solve, and you have to make sure that it's actually working for them. We get like a very large number of our customers are on renewable contracts. And when we look at the dollar volume of what we had last year in our data and software licensing, we get more than 100% renewed year over year. And that's because we embed in our software and our data licenses these account managers and servicing people. And it's not the training and the support. This is on top of training and support. They're going to go once a quarter or once a month, more often if the client will let us, and say, okay, what are your strategic objectives? What are the business problems you're trying to solve? What can you actually implement? What's your budget? And then we say, okay, let's try this kind of report or this kind of analysis, and let's carry it through to the other end. So we're not a consulting firm, but we will consult on your data strategy. So I think
it's like a value add to the software platform.
The salespeople have to, it's a heavy lift. It's not a widget sell, but you do have to be willing to ask for the business.
Let's talk through a few examples so people can understand. One of the companies or organizations is the Toronto Raptors.
Right. So we worked for MLSE for a number of years, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And, especially in the early days before the Raptors won the championship, plug, it was bringing basketball to Toronto. It was always popular, but there was a little bit of competition, right? So MLSE owns the Leafs and the Raptors, and the soccer team, the soccer team, and I think one other. But it's funny, sometimes people say, well, you work for the Raptors, why not the Leafs? Well, you don't even do anything to sell Leaf tickets in Toronto, right? So, but when the Raptors started out is really my best story, is they very early adopted an approach to fan analytics. It's completely widespread now in the NBA. As a matter of fact, the NBA gives an award and recognizes the contribution to fan analytics. But before any of that happened, MLSE hired a person who had been a database marketing expert from a fashion retailer to analyze their customer database. And they hired us. And my favorite story was looking at the composition of their fan base and understanding how to, Toronto is very multicultural, very culturally diverse community, and has been for a long time. Different from the US, we have twice as many cultural groups that represent a significant part of the population. And so what we did with the Raptors was we actually looked at the membership, the individual ticket sales and the membership, and we saw the growing interest from the South Asian, the Indian, and Pakistani communities in Toronto. And so we worked analyzing where the best potential was, and we helped them develop marketing campaigns for what was called Bollywood Nights. So they actually had cultural events. Eventually, when I think we had Jose Calderon playing, so we had a night that appealed to the Spanish community. And we worked with them to really do a deeper dive on the demographics of who was buying and look at the untapped potential, and then looked at what the other behaviors and attitudes were of those best potential customers and help them design sponsorship programs. So now, the Raptors are known for having a very progressive view on cultural diversity across the NBA. And I'm happy to say that the person who did that very early, bringing fan analytics using our data and our partnership, won the first NBA award on using data to help drive the fan base. And she's moved on to work in another sport, but it was kind of pioneering work before anybody was doing it. I'm very proud of that.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's looking at data and giving your best clients and customers and attracting them with something that they're going to love. And it's actually funny because when I picture the Raptors, part of what I picture, I think that his name's Nav Bhatia. He's like a famous Toronto Raptors super fan.
He's never missed a Raptors game, and he travels with them, and he travels,
That's wild.
Internationally with Canada basketball. And basketball is really growing across Canada in a lot of those growing communities. Canada is bringing 1 million immigrants a year because of the need for our labor market. the vast majority of those immigrants come from India. And that fan base is a hugely supportive base for the Toronto Raptors and for other sports as well. But it's just a matter of understanding who your customers are, where the gaps are. And because, you can't always just play to your strength. If you think about the Leafs, their season's tickets, a lot of them were purchased after the war when immigrants came from Italy, primarily, and other European countries to Canada and built our subways and went down in our mines. That's the legacy of, that period where we used to say that Toronto had the largest number of Italians in the world outside of Rome. It's not true anymore because that's a bit more distributed. But if you understand cultural diversity and where people came from, so a lot of immigrants I'm talking about now in the 50s bought Leaf tickets. And so Leaf Nation had a very strong representation in the Italian community. But guess what? In order to buy Leaf tickets, you have to pay like the right to buy, and then the season's tickets are expensive. So sometimes those rights to buy memberships get left in people's wills to their children, and sometimes their children can't afford to even pay for them, even though they were bought primarily by working class immigrants. So watching the kind of turnover in who the client base is, this is of course leaving aside the corporate seats, which we won't talk about, but understanding whether you're a sports team or you're a retailer or you're a not-for-profit, understanding that there's a lot of differences and that one size doesn't fit all. And when I was working in marketing in the 90s, we were all striving to how can we get a different message out. And I remember when Time magazine put out their first edition with different covers. It was a very expensive thing, but an organization similar to ours, really helped understand what motivates people to buy magazines, and they put different stories on the cover to see if they could properly target different messages to different people. Now, if you fast forward, that was expensive, very expensive to print. But now, because in the digital world, we can actually do different message, different creative, different hot buttons, different wording in different messages. All this data enables us to really not only understand the diversity and all aspects of diversity in our client base and in our potential client base, but it allows us to identify the untapped potential, and it allows us to get the right messaging with the right medium to the right people, and even at the right time. So we've come a long way, and I sometimes think that people could be using their data even more than they are now. So, we have this aspiration to do what I just said, really leverage the data, and yet you still go into many large organizations, and one division has their customer data in one format and another one has it in another. And, the C-suite are talking about AI and all of the great tools, but if organizations don't really have a data strategy, which says from the beginning, I'm going to use my data to make a difference. And I think one of the dangers I see, you didn't ask me this, but is organizations that are allowing the owners of the data and the analytics and the insights people to set the data strategy. Actually, I strongly believe that a data set strategy has to come from the C-suite, from the CFO, and the CEO, not just the CMO. Figure out, are we using our data to the best advantage? Do we have silos? How can we break down silos to make sure that we're really understanding our existing customers? If we do a lot of good work on our existing customers through our BI teams, how do we make sure that we're not neglecting the opportunity to get new customers? Like, there aren't that many organizations that have enough customers. So I see organizations that put all their emphasis on their internal data mining, but what our data can do is it can link from, who your best customers are that you already have to who's in the whole market. I like to call our data the denominator, because you can use our data to measure your market share, find your white space, understand how to market to your white space, and at the end of the day, grow your business. So it just couldn't be a more exciting time to be in the data business.
First of all, Jen, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, your stories, your lessons. And I just want to point everyone to check out and you can learn more. You can see if you're watching you listen to the audio, there's a video piece. We've shown their website throughout, but you can check out environicsanalytics.com. It's ENVIRONICS analytics.com to learn more. And Jan, I just want to be the first one to thank you.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm going to follow up and talk about how we can use your skills for our podcast. So.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jan.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like $100 grand.